the author said, the truth about istiwa. Question: after the slave girl hadith, which text should be clarified? If not for hadithul jariyah, this verse, Ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arushi istawa, would be our first reference, for it is their favorite. They claim it to be proof that Allah is above His Arsh, or that He sits upon it. Let us take a closer look at this honorable verse that is clear of their misinterpretation. The tafsir of the verse and how to refute the Wahhabis who misinterpret it. The word Ar-Rahman is a name of Allah. Al-Bayhaqi explained it as the one with abundant mercy for believers and disbelievers in this life, but His mercy is reserved for the believers in the hereafter, or the afterlife. This elaboration is better than what they say in many translations, the benevolent. If you want, just keep His name in Arabic, Ar-Rahman, and if you need to elaborate, explain the name with the proper elaboration. The word ala is what in English would be a preposition. It's called in Arabic harf jar. It has the meaning of ascendancy. That means going up or being high, whether literal or figurative. So it may translate as on or over. That's the translation, by status or by place. Or other than that, depends on the context where you find it. It might be translated as other than, on, or over. You might find it somewhere where it's translated as against, or it might be translated as according to. Depends on the sentence. But on doesn't have to be a literal place. And likewise, over doesn't have to be a literal place. So the meaning of ala is isti'la, ascendancy, whether literal or figurative. That means by status or by place. That's the same thing twice. By status or by place means literal or figurative. The word al-arsh apparently means the throne, but it is not a chair. They might define it in some of the dictionaries to the effect of Sarirul Malik, the bed of the king. Depending on your culture, you think of a throne as a chair. And then again, depending on your culture, you might see a throne as something not necessarily in the shape of a chair. It might be in the shape of a bed, actually. It is not a chair. Rather, it is the ceiling of paradise. And it is the largest of creations. That is, it is a firmament, but the biggest one. So the arsh to paradise is like the sama to the earth, compared to the earth. So you have the earth, and above it, there's something that Allah created. Some massive thing. It's called sama. That means sky or heaven or firmament. And so paradise has also a firmament, which is the arsh. It is carried by 4 enormous and praiseworthy angels. On Judgment Day, 8 shall carry it. The word istawa has many, many meanings. It is a past tense verb. Istawa, the present and future tense is yastawi. Istawa yastawi. It refers to the eternal attribute of Allah called Al-Istiwa. So make the difference between the actual attribute, which is istiwa, has kasra, T. It has a hamza at the end, istiwa. The verb that's mentioned in the verse is istawa. Ta, not T. No hamza at the end. Istawa. That's the past tense verb in the verse, and istiwa, that's the attribute itself. So the ayah is Ar-Rahmanu ala al-arsh istawa. Istawa. It means Ar-Rahman, that's Allah, He has istiwa over the arsh. Either it is an attribute of His self, like power and will, or it is an attribute of action, like creating life and creating death. So, Ahlul Sunnah differed. Is the istiwa sifatu that, an attribute of the self, like power and will and knowledge and hearing and sight and speech? Or is istiwa sifatu fi'l, an attribute of action or an attribute of doing, which means creating? Is it an act of Allah, a doing of Allah, which means an act of creating something? Like ihya. Al-ihya is Allah's creating life. Al-imata is Allah's creating death. And other attributes like that of doings. So they differed. Which of these two categories is the attribute of istiwa? And you will see that also they had the same difference about some other attributes of Allah, such as al-maji and al-ityan, which literally mean coming or approaching. Is it an attribute of the self of Allah, like knowledge and power and will? Or is it a doing of Allah, like His creating torture? Allah, what might literally be translated as Allah comes, it's the coming of His torture or of something that He creates. And the same difference they had about the attribute of nuzul, which literally means descending. Is it an attribute of the self of Allah, or is it an attribute of doings? So that's the case of the istiwa. Whatever its meaning, it is befitting, and Allah knows its reality. One of its linguistic meanings is jalasa, He sat, which does not befit Allah. For this, some Wahhabis and likeners before them said Allah sits on His throne. Al-Qamus, the famous dictionary by Al-Fayruz Abadi, lists 15 meanings for it. Maybe, inshallah, next time, if Allah helps me manage my time, I will prepare some excerpts from some of the famous dictionaries, and we can see what they say. Because of this dictionary, Al-Qamus, every Arabic dictionary was called Qamus. Qamus really means vast ocean. Doesn't mean dictionary. But because this dictionary became so much the embodiment of being a dictionary, every dictionary started being called Qamus after that. More meanings will be mentioned as we go along, if Allah will. Question: how did the scholars of Ahlul Sunnah explain this verse? There are two methods of interpreting texts like this. And now what we mentioned about the hadith of the female slave, and as he will mention about other texts to come, God willing. And as we have mentioned over and over again in the past. So you're familiar with that. One is to believe in it without assigning any particular meaning to it. Who can tell me what that's called? To believe in the text without assigning any particular meaning to it. Tell me that in 15 seconds, which is way too long. 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. General ta'wil. Naam. Ta'wilun ijmali. Correct. to believe in it without assigning any particular meaning to it. Do not seek its specific meaning. Following this method, we simply take the position that it has a befitting meaning that complies with the rules of the religion, without the need of contravening the Arabic language. That means without the need of breaking the rules of the Arabic language, and Allah knows about it. We confirm that its meaning is becoming without stipulating what that meaning is, and we merely say Allah is attributed with Istiwa. This is the general way of the Salaf, and the meaning of Ash-Shafi'i's saying, Amantu bima ja'a anillah ala muradillah. I believe in what came from Allah according to the meaning that Allah willed. Wa bima ja'a ar rasulillah ala muradi rasulillah. And I believe in what came from the messenger of Allah according to the meaning that the messenger of Allah meant. So let the Wahhabis follow it. If they follow that, they will be safe. Question: what about all the quotes they produce that the scholars said, we believe that Allah rose over the throne? Do not be fooled by the misquoted translations produced by Wahhabis. They bring mistranslated quotes from the Imams about this issue, claiming that they said, we believe that Allah rose above his arsh, or rose over his arsh, while truly they only said, we believe in istiwa, or we believe that Allah istawa. They did not say, we believe that istawa means that Allah rose above his arsh. Nor did they say, we believe that istawa means that Allah sat. They said istawa without a how, not specifying a meaning. Not he sat without a how. They said the meaning of istawa is not like what is imagined, and not it is impossible to say how Allah mounted the arsh. For that reason, if a Wahhabi brings such a mistranslation, attributing it to a reliable scholar, tell him, do not bring me your translation of what a scholar said when he used a word that can have 15 meanings. Bring the explicit evidence that those scholars said istawa, when attributed to Allah, means rose above or sat. That they said it that straightforwardly, that frankly and clearly and plainly and blatantly, which they didn't. In other words, tell him to bring the proof that those scholars assigned a particular definition to istawa over another, and do not accept a simple translation that, after all, is by a Wahhabi. Not to mention that their norm is to not give you the Arabic quote in their English books, unless it is a verse from the Qur'an with their translation. They might give you the Arabic of a hadith with their translation, maybe. So in their books, they'll give you the Arabic of the ayah and then the meaning. And they might even take the Arabic out. We'll see, inshallah, if Allah enables us to reach the section on innovations, we'll take a look at Darus Salam's translation of the Qur'an that doesn't have a single letter of Arabic in it. Nowhere. Just the cover maybe that says Al-Qur'an. I don't even remember if that's in Arabic. So they'll give you the verse from the Qur'an with their translation. They'll give you the meaning of a hadith, a translation of the hadith, and they won't give you the Arabic text. And they might give you the Arabic text of the hadith with their translation, but rarely, almost never, do they give the Arabic text of a scholarly quote. They are confident that their followers will not check the quotes for themselves, unless by the time they know enough Arabic to do so, they are fully indoctrinated and committed to support the lies and misconceptions, willing to bend the rules. Take, for example, they're frequently misquoting Abu Hanifa, that they say, well, do you take from Abu Hanifa? We say, yes. They say, well, even Abu Hanifa said, نُقِرُّ بِأَنَّ اللَّهَ اسْتَوَى عَلَى الْعَرْشِ. That's if they gave you the Arabic. I'm being generous by putting the Arabic there. They will say that Abu Hanifa said, we confess that Allah rose over the throne. So imagine that without even any Arabic there, just in English. Without quoting the rest of the statement, that he said, مِنْ غَيْرِ أَنْ يَكُونَ لَهُ حَاجَةٌ إِلَيْهِ, without there being for him any need of it. What he really said is, we confess that Allah istawa ala al-arsh, not that he rose over the throne. He said, نُقِرُّ بِأَنَّ اللَّهَ اسْتَوَى عَلَى الْعَرْشِ. We confess that Allah istawa over the arsh, مِنْ غَيْرِ أَنْ يَكُونَ لَهُ حَاجَةٌ إِلَيْهِ, without there being for him any need of it. وَاسْتِقْرَارٌ عَلَيْهِ, or dwelling over it. وَهُوَ الْحَافِظُ لِلْعَرْشِ وَغَيْرِ الْعَرْشِ, and he is the preserver of the arsh and of other than the arsh. فَلَوْ كَانَ مُحْتَاجًا لَمَا قَدَرَ عَلَى إِيجَادِ الْعَالَمِ. For had he been in need, he would not have had the power to create the world, وَتَدْبِيرِهِ, and to manage it. كَالْمَخْلُوق, like the creation. وَلَوْ كَانَ مُحْتَاجًا إِلَى الْجُلُوسِ وَالْقَرَارِ. And had he been needy of sitting and dwelling, فَقَبْلَ خَلْقِ الْعَرْشِ أَيْنَ كَانَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى. Then before creating the arsh, or the creation of the arsh, where was Allah? Exalted is He. تَعَالَى اللَّهُ عَنْ ذَلِكَ عُلُوًّا كَبِيرًا. Exalted is Allah from that, highly and greatly. All of that, they don't put that. There's a book called The Creed of the Four Imams, a small booklet by the Wahhabis. If you ever see it or get your hands on it, that's one of the places where they put this. They say the Creed of the Four Imams, and then they start looking through the statements of the Imams and picking and choosing what they want without the Arabic text. If the Wahhabi brings some statements from some of the old reliable scholars like Mujahid, the student of Ibn Abbas, and Al-Farra, who's a great linguist, claiming that those scholars said it means rose above, by using such words as irtafa'a or ala. Let's say they did give you some Arabic. They say, hell, you here's some Arabic for you, irtafa'a. Mujahid said ala. Then know that even those words still can have the meaning of highness and status and majesty, not only highness in place. That is assuming that the narrations are authentic. If he brought you the statement of an alim, scholar, in the first place, if he doesn't have the Arabic text there, we don't want it for sure. Tell him, bring the reference, let's see. Bring me the Arabic. I don't even have to search for it. Why are you going to make me search for it? You bring it to me. You don't have to do the homework for him. Do not be shaken by this, because it is known that there are two types of highness. Don't be shaken by someone bringing a statement that mentions highness. Even if they did bring you without any Arabic, you would be able to say highness is not only physical, highness is also majestic. There are two types of highness: physical, which is impossible to be an attribute of Allah, and majestic, which is necessary to be an attribute of Allah. Thus, had they used words that attribute highness to Allah, that in itself is not evidence that Allah is in a place. And they cannot bring a single quote of a scholar who explicitly and blatantly from the Salaf said Allah is in a place like that. Or that one of those scholars from the Salaf said Allah is where He said He is. That's what the Wahhabis say often. While on the other hand, we are able to bring plenty of statements from the Salaf and beyond that the scholars said Allah exists without a place, blatantly and clearly. And they know that. Furthermore, had they intended by those expressions, had those scholars intended by those expressions, assuming that the narration is authentic, that Allah exists in a physical location, they would be rejected by virtue of the definitive evidence that Allah does not resemble his creation. Upon that, that scholar would be a mushabbih. If that's what he said, he would be a likener like the Wahhabi. It has happened. 2, the other method is to investigate the Arabic language and select what is befitting to Allah. For example, do not use jalasa, he sat, because that implies that Allah has a body. Do not use i'tadala, to become upright, for that would liken Allah to the plants that stand tall on their stalks. As Allah told us about the crops, فَاسْتَوَى عَلَى سُوقِهِ, it istawa, stood upright on its stalk. Surah Al-Fatih, ayah 29. Do not use the meaning to ripen, nadija, for that would liken Allah to the fruits, nor to become complete, tamma, for that would liken him to the men who reach the prime of their strength, as Allah told us about Prophet Musa. وَلَمَّا بَلَغَ أَشُدَّهُ وَاسْتَوَى آتَيْنَاهُ حُكْمًا وَعِلْمًا. When he reached the prime of his strength and istawa, was complete, we granted him prophethood and knowledge. وَلَمَّا بَلَغَ أَشُدَّهُ, when he reached his prime of his strength, wastawa, and he istawa, tamma, and he was complete, آتَيْنَاهُ حُكْمًا وَعِلْمًا, we granted him prophethood and knowledge. Do not use to dwell in a place or to be firmly established upon something, istaqarra, or else he would be similar to the ark, the boat of Prophet Nuh. Allah told us in his book about that ark, وَاسْتَوَتْ عَلَى الْجُودِ, it istawa, settled upon the peak of Mount Judi. As for that ta, istawat, that's because it's feminine. So when you say istawa with the alif, it's masculine. Istawat with the ta, it's feminine. But it's the same verb besides that. So those who claimed that Allah settled upon the throne have unwittingly likened him to a boat that settled upon a mountain. Ibn Taymiyyah's role model, Uthman ibn Sa'id, said that when Allah lands on the arsh, the angels who carry it buckle to their knees under his weight. None of these meanings befits Allah, even though they are linguistically applicable to istawa. They work for the word istawa in the language. They don't work as attributes of Allah. And there are many more meanings. One of the meanings of istawa is qahara, to subdue. If a Wahhabi says that this does not befit Allah because it implies that Allah did not have control over the arsh and then he conquered it, so it's not befitting, then do not say it means he rose above the arsh, because it implies that he was not above it and then he became above it. How do you forbid what you do? They say to us, oh, you can't say it means qahara, because that would mean that, according to them, that's what it means. We're not agreeing. But they say that would mean that he didn't have control over the arsh and then he struggled and conquered it. You can say to them, so you thought about that and you came to that conclusion and you realized that that meaning is not befitting what they said of struggling and then conquering after not having dominance. How did you at the same time say he rose over the throne when that means that he wasn't above it and then he became above it? They won't have an answer for that. Nothing that makes sense anyway. Then we add what shows that the word qahara is attributable to Allah are his two names, Al-Qahir and Al-Qahhar. Allah says, وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ. So he attributed to himself, he named himself Al-Qahir. And he said, وَهُوَ الْوَاحِدُ الْقَهَّارُ. He is the one and the Qahhar. So that proves that he's attributed with Qahr. And one of the meanings of Istawa is Qahara, to subdue, to conquer, to dominate. The correct explanation is that when the Arsh was created, it was subjugated by Allah's power. From the moment it came into existence, it was subjugated by His power. There is no implication of struggle. In this verse, Allah informed us that He subdues the Arsh, the largest of creations, and subsequently controls everything else. And this is what many of the Salaf said. Al-Bukhari narrated about Mujahid that Al-Bukhari said, وَقَالَ مُجَاهِدْ إِسْتَوَى عَلَى الْعَرْشِ. Mujahid said, Istawa means ala, subjugated the arsh. As Zajjaj said in Ma'ani al-Qur'an, وَقَالُوا مَعْنَا اسْتَوَى إِسْتَوْلَى. They said that the meaning of istawa is istawla, subjugated, dominated. This word istawla is very repulsive to the Wahhabis. Usually when they deny that istiwa means dominance and subjugation, the Arabic word that they will choose to deny is istawla. They don't usually go to deny the word qahara. It means the same thing, but their word of choice to deny is istawla, and they find it very hideous. Al-Akhfash said, على العرش استوى يقول على ومعنى على قدر. Istawa over the arsh means subjugated, ala. And the meaning of subjugated, ala, is the ascription of power, qadara. And there are many more references. Extra detail. Their denial that istiwa means subjugation. You may need to know that they have another deception. They say that whenever the verb ala, is made transitive by the particle ala, so they're pronounced the same way, but if you know how to read the Arabic, you can see they're spelled differently. The verb has a standing alif, while the particle has alif maksura, alif shaped like a ya. So they say that whenever the verb ala is made transitive by the particle ala, such as Mujahid's previous statement, we saw what Mujahid said, وَقَالَ Mujahid istawa ay ala al-arsh. He's saying istawa ala al-arsh means ala al-arsh. So how do they get out of that? They say whenever the verb ala is made transitive by the particle ala, basically when those two come together, such as Mujahid's previous statement, it emphatically means rose over. They mean physically rose over. Literally rose over. And cannot refer to domination or supremacy. This is another lie that is refuted by the 91st verse of Al-Mu'minun. وَمَا كَانَ مَعَهُ مِنْ إِلَهٍ. There was never a God with him. Either had there been, لَذَهَبَ كُلُّ إِلَهٍ بِمَا خَلَقَ. Then every God would have taken what it created. وَلَعَلَى بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. And then some of them would have ala, dominated, ala, over others. So if someone wanted to translate that as some of them would have rose over others, it means dominated, conquered. Yes, they are pronounced exactly the same. One is a verb though, so ala, that's past tense. The present and future tense becomes ya'lu. The sound changes. Ala ya'lu. The particle ala, it just stays like that. It's just stuck. It's not, doesn't have different tenses or anything. It's just a particle, like a preposition. Their claim that the meaning subjugation for istawa is unfounded in the Arabic language is easily countered by not only the aforementioned verse, but also the statements of many linguists, some already mentioned, and others such as Al-Raghib Al-Asbahani in his famous Mufradatul Qur'an, where he said, وَمَتَى عُدِّيَ بِعَلَى اقْتَضَى مَعْنَى الْإِسْتِيلَاءِ كَقَوْلِهِ الرَّحْمَنُ عَلَى الْعَرْشِ اسْتَوَى. Whenever it, istawa, is made transitive by the preposition ala, it has the meaning of subjugation. Yes, even scholars from the Salaf have documented that, such as the Mujtahid and Hafiz Al-Tabari in his tafsir, where he said, in the speech of the Arabs, Al-Istiwa is used to have different meanings. Then he said, after listing several, وَمِنْهَا الِاحْتِيَازِ وَالِاسْتِيلَاءِ. Among those meanings is taking possession and subjugation. This is enough to counter a Wahhabi who says that Ibn al-A'rabi was asked if he knows about istawa having the meaning of istawla, subjugation. And he said, I do not know it. So Wahhabi might bring you something from Ibn al-A'rabi. Let's say Ibn al-A'rabi was asked, can istawa mean istawla? And he said, I don't know it. To them, that's a proof that it doesn't mean that. That's how they think. It's not a proof that it doesn't mean that. He's saying, I don't know. I don't know it. It's not in my knowledge. The scholars have a rule. Man hafidha hujjatun ala man lam yahfaz. It means the one who knows or memorizes something is given priority over he who does not. If I don't know something, I was asked about a question and I said, I don't know. And then someone else was asked the same question and he gave the answer. His answer is not refuted because I said I don't know. In fact, his answer is given priority over mine because he knows and I don't know. If the Wahhabis produce another narration in which he said, Ibn al-A'rabi, the Arabs do not say that a person conquered something, istawla ala shay, unless he had an opponent. So they say, here, this one. Respond, this narration contradicts the first because here he is confirming that he knows it. So which one? He knows it or he doesn't know it? If they say at first he didn't know it, but then he learned it, then respond by saying, then it is also possible that he did not know that they use subjugation, istawla, without a reference to a previous struggle or the existence of an opponent. What proves that they did use the meaning of subjugation without the existence of a struggle or an opponent is the famous verse of Arabic poetry, قَدْ اسْتَوَى بِشْرٌ عَلَى الْعِرَاقِ مِنْ غَيْرِ سَيْفٍ وَدَمٍ مُهْرَاقِ. Bishr, istawa, conquered Iraq without a sword and without blood spill. If they say that the poet who said this line is unknown, so this is how they're fighting us on this. No. They're pulling out everything to discredit istawa to mean conquer or subjugate or dominate, which is completely fine. They don't want it to mean that, so they've pulled out everything they have. So if they say that the poet who said this line is unknown, we respond by saying that several scholars, such as Az-Zabidi, And even Ibn Kathir, whom they consider an authority, have confirmed him to be Al-Akhtal, the Christian Arab poet. So he is known, not unknown. Additionally, anyone who has studied Arabic properly knows that there are many lines of poetry used as references in the Arabic language, despite that their authors are unknown. That's known already. We already agree to that. Yani, that there are plenty of lines of poetry that their authors are unknown. Not that we're confessing or submitting to this one who said this line of poetry being unknown, but even if he was, so what? For the Wahhabi to bring that up is an indication of his ignorance, or he knows, but he's trying to trick you. Anyone who has studied Arabic properly knows that there are many lines of poetry used as references in the Arabic language, meaning used as proof for rules in the Arabic. Despite that their authors are unknown, the condition is not that their author has to be known. Rather, the condition is that they are confirmed to be from the period, from the time of those whose speech is used as reference and evidence in the Arabic language. If it is known that that talk, that line of poetry, or even might be a proverb, for example, it's known to be from that old time of the classical Arabic, even if it's not known who said it. It might have become like a proverb, so they just say it. Then they use it as evidence for the Arabic language. So even if he was unknown, so what? But he is known. He was confirmed by some to be Al-Akhtal, the Christian poet. So now what they're going to do, they say, well, he was a Christian, so how can you use his speech as evidence? The simple answer is that it is not a condition for the poet to be a Muslim. The condition is that he came from the period of those whose speech is used as reference and evidence for the rules of the Arabic language. Many lines of poetry that were said by the idol worshippers were quoted by Ibn Abbas when he would interpret verses of the Qur'an. How can they discredit that he was a Christian when this is a matter of trying to prove something in the language? All those lines of poetry that Ibn Abbas used to quote, who said those lines of poetry? Mushriks, pagans. All those lines of poetry, not all of them of course, but so many of those lines of poetry spread in those books of Arabic language, of Nahu and other books. Who said so many of those lines? Mushriks. So there's no point in trying to discredit the line of poetry because the one who said it was a Christian. While that Christian Arab came from the time of those Arabs whose speech was still pure, so the way they spoke is evidence for the rules of Arabic language. Their belief is not the condition for taking their language as evidence. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam, and Allah knows best. We'll stop there, insha'Allah ta'ala.